Welcome to Boundaries and Beyond, the podcast that empowers you to set boundaries and nurture self-care, as well as have happier, healthier relationships. I'm Jennifer, your co-host.
And I'm Dr. Pokerel, your other co-host. And joining us is Trinity, the real junkyard dog.
Say hello.
And sometimes Toby doesn't want to be left out, so
Yeah.
he's spread out in the front of us.
Yes. I hear the term boundaries thrown around a lot these days, but what does that term actually mean? We're here to clear all that up.
In every episode, we'll break it all down for you, share practical tips for building better boundaries so you can have healthier, happier, more balanced lives. And yes, we are that good.
Oh my goodness.
We need to know, what is Trinity wearing today?
Well, she has a beautiful, cozy black sweater with bumblebee on the back and fur fringe. Almost looks like Toby.
Toby's the cat.
Yes, that's a little. Well, anyway, her little outfit was made by Irene from Ukraine, and if you ever want to look her up on Etsy, she makes the best custom-made outfits. As you know, Trinity only has 3 legs, so she has to have hers made specially. Although it might take a little while for you to receive your little gift because, unfortunately, there's some horrible things, as you know, going on in Ukraine, and she has to deal with.
No, we're not going to go into
electricity.
any of that. Just that was just to know about the custom-made outfits.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So our topic today is on the Dark Triad, which is psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. So we're going to discuss what that is and how to not only spot that in your everyday life, but to protect yourself from that with boundaries. And really, if you are living a daily life of setting proper boundaries, you're really protecting yourself regularly from these types. But there is a spectrum of these personality traits. So while someone might not be a full-blown narcissist or Machiavellian personality type, people do have these traits on a spectrum. So you might have to live with this person as a family member or a boss or a coworker. And so how do you protect yourself from these people within your life? That's what we're going to talk about today. And I can tell you, I kind of went through life with rose-colored glasses. Boundaries have really helped me, especially in the workplace. I know as a business owner and hiring, I had to learn to spot these characteristics on the fly, like within minutes, within the time that it takes to interview a person. And it's funny, some of these traits, you don't see them until you kind of have to wear the person down. One person talks to him, another person talks to him for 30 minutes, another talks to him for 15 minutes, and then their true colors start to show out with the right questioning. But you have to be attuned to very subtle hints. And so we're going to talk about that. Some of the YouTubes that have helped me a lot in that are the Behavior Panel. They teach a lot about body language. Dr. Jordan B. Peterson is an expert in that, and Dr. Neil Grande. So if you want to dive into these topics a little deeper, look those people up.
So you're always making fun of my accent and my English.
Yes.
So what is a Machiavelliism? It's not like a mechanical process.
I think it's because I have a cold. Machiavellian, that's how you say it. In fact, I thought Dr. Peterson even said specifically that's how you say it, right?
Machiavellism?
Machiavellian?
Machiavellian.
Okay, so maybe
Machiavellian. So in short, people in the forensic psychology field call him Max. Machs.
Okay.
Max. So
like Big Mac.
That's for short. Yeah. So let's use the lingo so we sound more erudite.
That's the Big Macs, like like Mr. Kroc, the great Machiavellian founder of McDonald's.
Okay, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
So let's go on. So I think one of the things that's going on in the online sphere
Mhm.
and in the news is these two brothers that have been in trouble for a while, and I don't want to mention their names too much, but it's the Tate brothers
Yeah.
and Andrew Tate, and then they're often been associated with the Dark Triad. And I don't want to try the case. I don't want to go in details, but just want to get an idea of what is it that we're trying to talk about in terms of boundaries.
Mhm.
So have you heard of the Red Pill movement?
I've heard the Tate brothers talk about it, but I hate the idea that they hijacked my favorite metaphor from The Matrix.
The Matrix, I know,
Yeah.
red pill, blue pill thing.
Mhm.
So one of the things about the Red Pill movement is that it's appealed to young men because it's reactionary to modern feminism.
Mhm.
And I think for most of us, the traditional feminism, the so-called first wave, was meant to give women equality in terms of value, right?
Mhm. The right to
equality,
vote,
right to vote, etc.
right to have land.
And I think most people, don't have a problem with that. If I had a daughter, I have two boys, but if I had a daughter, I want her to have those rights and be able to vote, etc.
Me?
Right. Well, you're married to me, so that it's too late for that.
Are you saying I own you?
Yeah. The lock, you got that little lockbox with
I
the
love
things
you.
in it. So,
I love you, honey.
so the point being is, I don't think many people argue with that. But then the second and third wave feminism took them to destroy or badmouth the so-called patriarchy.
Yeah.
And a lot of what's happening in the red pill sphere is, or it's also called the manosphere, is that it's attracted young men because, I think a lot of them have felt disenfranchised. I grew up in a scenario where I was raised by an extreme feminist, and
Too extreme.
yeah, and literally every other word I would hear is how horrible men are. And I was a child, and growing up, this is all I heard. How horrible men are, useless men are, they're not worth anything. And then I always had in the back of the mind, what about me? As a kid growing up, hearing that is, okay, how does that apply to me? Because all I heard from her about me was how wonderful I was, but men suck.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was very confusing. And that's one of the things I ended up in therapy is because of those messages. So I understand why young men have gravitated towards this red pill movement. However, I'm not a red pillar, so I may be wrong about some of this, but the message that I think a lot of young men have taken out of it is to devalue women. So it's a reactionary. So feminist, second and third wave feminists devalue men, and these red pillars devalue women. So that's not helping anything. That's not helping relationships.
It's two extremes of the same. And what do we say about two extremes?
Well, there's like if I have one hand in the freezer, the other hand on the oven.
Yeah.
And I'm balanced, but I'm not comfortable. So I'm all over that, I'm going from one extreme to the other. And that's, I think that was Albert Einstein that said that made that analogy about balance. And anyway, yes, it's going to extremes. And then you combine those extremes and one of the things that we're seeing in our society
is chaos.
Is chaos between relationships and a decline in the birth rate. And that is awful. So the destruction of the family has been part of the problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of men, I hear this from men that it's not worth it to get married. One of the things that came out of the feminist movement is the no-fault divorce. And that has destroyed marriages. And that's neither one of those is okay. So we were just at the ARC, Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. And by the way, I'd encourage you to look that up, ARC Forum. And listen to some of the lectures that were given that were wonderful. But one of the goals is to restore the family because that's the basic unit of society is the family.
Yeah.
And is the best thing for children is to have intact families. I mean, there's really no question about that. And some people may disagree, they might argue, but I think there's very little legitimate argument against the intact family, and even extended versions like having grandparents involved and cousins, aunts, uncles, everybody having a very strong family unit and system, right?
Yes. So what about the Dark Triad?
Where
Tell
does it
me,
come in?
yeah, where does that come in?
So the thing about the Dark Triad is the mating strategies.
Mhm.
And we're seeing a lot of one of the aspects of the feminist movement, and I experienced that living with feminists,
Mhm.
is that the expansion of free love or promiscuity.
Yeah.
In terms of boundaries, we know that's really not a healthy thing.
Mhm.
And so when women engaged in this hookup culture, they're attracting what are called short-term mating strategy individuals.
Mhm.
And those are the Dark Triad individuals.
Mhm.
So especially the psychopaths, so what do I mean by short and long term? And this is just a very simple overview. Short term is the ones that like to go and sleep around with a bunch of women, talking about men, a bunch of women, and then not have any long term relationships with them.
Mhm.
And then you may get pregnant, and then they may never hear about it from that guy again,
Mhm.
or maybe a deadbeat dad,
Mhm.
right? In terms of the long term mating strategies, they're the ones that are looking for a long term relationship. They will marry you, they will focus on their children, and they will have a job, and there is a long-term commitment to the well-being of the children,
Mhm.
even beyond their childhood, right? Even when they're adults, you stay involved, help them raise their own children. So one of the things that we had problems with because of our broken families is when we had children, we didn't have a lot of family support.
Mhm.
So having grandparents around is very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And we missed some of that. So we do want to be around for when our children have grandchildren, right? So that's a long-term commitment to families.
Mhm. I want to say that having that additional support is also protection from a narcissistic parent or a parent with one of the dark triads. Often, somebody that is a full blown psychopath is going to probably end up in prison at some
Hmm.
point, and so having that extended family is very important.
There's a couple of things there. Let's talk about the traits themselves. In the psychological field, we all have some narcissism. We all have some traits that fall under narcissism and some traits that fall under psychopathy
Mm.
and some that may fall under Machiavelliism, right? That doesn't mean we are those things.
Yeah.
And part of what a healthy society does is encourages the positive traits.
Hmm.
And the most cases of dark triad, I wouldn't say most cases, but high number of them are what we call subclinical. In other words, they're not someone that would be diagnosed. They actually can be very successful, especially the narcissist can be very competent.
And Machiavellian.
Max.
I'll just call him Max.
Yes. Those may actually be very successful too, but eventually something will happen. Often what ends up happening is that their business or career is doing really well, but their life around them falls apart.
Mhm.
Multiple divorces, multiple kids. We know of somebody that a very successful surgeon and kept having affairs and ended up having to leave. But as a surgeon, he's still very successful, but his whole life around them was a mess. But as a surgeon, he's still very successful. So those people sometimes they seem to be okay from a career standpoint, but their personal lives are a mess.
Mhm.
And they don't care. That's
Yeah.
a narcissism part, right?
Yeah.
They don't care. So one of and then with the Max, one example often used is Bernie Madoff,
Mhm.
who engaged in fraud
Mhm.
and defrauded a large number of people. And now he's in jail, but for years and years, he was considered a great CEO and he was sought after. So those are the type of situations that may or may not be somebody you encounter. Those are probably more extreme cases.
Yeah.
But what about the subtle ones that may affect relationships and the workplace? Those are the ones we want to focus on
Yeah.
and how to spot them. So I completely agree with what you said, that if you have healthy boundaries, you are not going to be bamboozled by any of these people,
Yeah.
by any of these dysfunctional
Yeah.
individuals.
You would spot this person in an interview. You would spot this person on a date right away. But what happens to those people that are already stuck with that person in their
Yeah,
life?
and
Like maybe it's a parent or,
that's part of what we want to talk about.
yeah,
But I would say that sometimes it does take longer than just a date or an interview to pick these guys out or
yeah.
these people, because women can have the dark triad as well.
Hmm.
But it may take some time. But once you engage with them, let's say you date someone for 6 months, it'll come out.
Yeah.
You'll start seeing it.
Yeah.
And if you have healthy boundaries, you'll be out of there.
Hmm.
But if you don't have healthy boundaries, you will continue to fall into this toxic relationship. If you're in a toxic relationship, you're probably involved with one of these person with a triad. But here's the other thing. You might have the dark triad too.
Yeah.
You got to be able to look in the mirror and recognize what is your role in this, or why do you keep falling for somebody with a dark triad? Because you're in that relationship for a reason.
Yeah.
And there are two types of narcissism. There's the grandiose type. That's the one that most people are familiar with.
Hmm.
But then there's the vulnerable narcissist, which is the victim.
Yeah.
And the victim is always, we feel for the victim, but
Mhm.
if you keep falling into the victim role, it's like, what's going on with you?
Yeah.
You got to get out of that victim role. And sometimes it's hard to see it
Hmm.
because we're so busy being victims. And I'm talking about, I was in a similar situation
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. So, from a woman's point of view or perspective, just many girlfriends, family members, it often looks like that guy with the extra charisma, he's so macho, he's so manly. Why wouldn't I be attracted to somebody like that? Super successful and well, partly because and he's so exciting. Well, a lot of times in relationships, we confuse intimacy for intensity.
Or even love for intensity.
Yeah. And so, that intense whirlwind relationship or that boss that promises you the moon and the stars may not be all they're cut out to be. And so that's why we always I tell my boys, give it a good 3 months before you start really, keep your guard up. In dating, they tell you to wait at least 3 months before you have any kind of real intimacy, before you start kissing and really mugging down, getting serious. In friendships as well. You meet a friend, be cool for the first 3 months or so. Just keep it at, going out to have coffee or seeing each other at church or that venue that you met them at until you can get to know them. I know, something you think of friendship is harmless, but I had a friendship where I got involved with somebody that began to stalk me and call me 20, 30 times a day. And
And didn't you have a few stalkers, not just one?
yeah, I had a knack for attracting them, women and men.
And by the way, just as a side note, when did that stop?
It really stopped the more I started exercising my boundaries. And the last time I was stalked was with that friend. That was probably when I really started learning about boundaries. I took a serious Bible study workshop with Townsend and Cloud's workbook with a Bible study group, and we started working, and it's almost like it was a godsend. Like, this was my workout partner with boundaries, because I was involved with her in a lot of different
So this is a
things.
woman that you're talking about that was
Yes,
stalking you.
yes, and I had to even stop going to a group that I was in with her because she was such a bully, and the leader just didn't have the boundaries to
Yeah, they didn't know how to set boundaries.
they didn't know how to set boundaries with her and protect me, and so I had to protect myself and leave. She even joined a group of ours that we started and founded, but she soon learned that we weren't going to
We
put
weren't
up.
going to tolerate it.
Yeah, that was interesting that you asked. When did I stop having problems with attracting stalker type personalities? And it was after I really started getting rigorous with setting boundaries. And it was interesting in that group that you and I were in, we both set boundaries on her that she couldn't bring her dog into the group.
I know the dog was constantly disrupting, and we
Yeah.
love dogs, but
Yeah.
the dog was constantly disrupting the
It
group.
was not appropriate for that kind of group.
Yeah.
We have a dog here, but this is not that kind of group.
So, and I think that's an important lesson, is that people without healthy boundaries, and I would argue that everybody with a dark triad has very poor boundaries.
Yeah,
They cannot tolerate a person with healthy boundaries.
exactly.
So let's go over some of the traits of each one. Let's start with maybe narcissism. So narcissistic people tend to be very self-aggrandizing. They can't stop talking about themselves. Their self-importance is exaggerated. So a lot of times if you're in some kind of meeting or a date, let's say, and you're in there with a narcissist, they're not going to ask you questions about yourself. They're going to get talking about themselves.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the whole conversation and how well they do, etc. And then the other thing is, when
They may be interesting,
they may be fascinating
but
and charismatic.
if they have no interest in you, eventually they're going to become really boring.
But that's the other thing, is they depend on your interest in them to hold a relationship. So if you don't show interest, then they're either going to get aggressive, or they're not going to be interested in you, because it's going to affect them. And that's one of the things when there's an ego threat. In other words, when you threaten their ego, even not intentionally necessarily, they get very aggressive.
Yeah.
So those are the more narcissistic, the more aggressive they get.
So what kind of personality types would the narcissist be interested in?
Well, that from a psychological standpoint, it would be a person who is dependent or likes drama. That would be like the borderline. The histrionic personality types, those would be very interested, or attracted to the narcissist. But other narcissists might as well, especially the vulnerable types.
What about somebody that just likes to doesn't want the spotlight on them? They're very humble. They're very accommodating.
Well, that works fine for a narcissist because they're not taking their spotlight. But I want to stay away from the psychological terms and focus a little bit more on the practical, which is the boundaries.
Well, I'm just wondering, so if I'm attracted to you as a narcissist, what is it about me that, if I keep attracting narcissists in my life, what is it about me that keeps bringing them into my life?
Well, again, that's why I want to talk about the boundaries. If you have healthy boundaries, you can recognize that and not be attracted to those people. Once you're able to tease out the issues that are attracted to the narcissist, and that's why I want to look at if we look at the characteristics, you'll understand why. So, for example, a narcissist will say, and by the way, if you ask this narcissist this question specifically, they're not going to lie to you. Yeah. Because they believe this stuff. So they don't think they're narcissists. So a narcissist will deny even the existence of narcissism, or they're narcissist. So I like having authority over people. So in the workplace, they will exert that. Okay. And if they're constantly trying to boss people around, then that's a clue. That's not necessarily, I'm a boss. I have to boss people around at work.
So am I. I've been called bossy before.
Yes, and me too, especially by my wife. But that doesn't mean, but we also still discuss that and address, we make decisions jointly. And a narcissist will have trouble making a decision jointly. Yes. Okay, so that's one clue. You're asking about what are those characteristics. If that person doesn't like to make a decision jointly, then you might be dealing with a narcissist. But at the same time, do you not like to make decisions jointly? Yeah. Right? Oh, let him make all the decisions. I don't want to make the decisions. Let him make them.
So that's easy prey.
That's
right
easy
there.
prey.
Yeah.
Yeah. People always seem to recognize my authority.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the narcissist, is like people look at him and they put him on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And sometimes they seem so competent and so authoritative that people put him in a pedestal. So that's the love addict
Mm-hmm.
who puts the other person up in a pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a tendency to put people on a pedestal,
Mm-hmm.
that's where the narcissist is going to reel you in.
Well, I've noticed in the workplace, people always gravitate to you as the leader. So, how do you discern between that person that people just put their faith in and that person who just becomes the boss, the dictator?
Well, again, some of this has to do with competence.
Yeah.
So people do gravitate towards competence,
Mhm.
and most people are not leaders, they're
Yeah.
followers.
Mhm.
So they do need a leader. The question is this leader up on a pedestal, and are we dealing with a workplace issue? Because that sometimes, politicians, they're all very narcissistic.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? Exclude a leader that's a narcissist?
Yeah.
Every president
Yeah.
has to be a narcissist.
Yeah.
They have to have some serious, and Mac, and they have to be a Mac as well, because they have to negotiate. They have to engage in power politics, right?
Yeah.
That's where Machiavelliism comes from.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, and for those people that don't know, Niccolo Machiavelli wrote the book The Prince. It's about principalities and manipulation and power politics, and how do you deal with other estates.
Mhm.
That's where that term comes from.
Mhm.
And I read that a long time ago, but that's where the term comes from. But it's manipulation,
Mhm.
essentially. And a lot of times leaders have to be manipulative
Mhm.
to negotiate.
Yeah. The
Right.
art of war.
The art
You
of
know?
war, the art of the deal,
Mm-hmm.
etc. So going back to what were we talking about? You're talking about recognizing a leader versus a narcissist.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, sometimes in the workplace that's going to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
Are you gonna get into a relationship with somebody like that? That's
Yeah.
where you make the mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Women tend to be attracted to men who seem competent, and the question is, do they seem competent or are they competent?
Yeah. As in general.
In general,
Yeah.
narcissists can be very competent,
Mm-hmm.
and part of it is because they have resources.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what attracts a number of women, is a man who can have resources or
Mhm.
has resources.
Mm-hmm. In general.
Everything's in general.
Yes.
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 This is you're letting your feminist out. This is what got us into this mess in the first place.
There's nothing wrong with a strong woman.
No, and I agree with that. They will say, like, I'm a born leader. They believe they're a born leader.
Mhm.
This is them talking about themselves.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody says this person's a born leader, and
I've heard women on the other side say I'm a control freak. And they are like they mean it. Believe people when they say something about themselves. Don't just that's one thing I learned as a business owner is when somebody says I'm a control freak, believe them.
yeah,
Don't take that with a grain of salt. You might need to investigate that statement a little more.
right. Because in the
But-
workplace, somebody who is high in conscientiousness, they have OCD, and they check their mistakes, their errors. That might be a good thing.
Yeah.
But somebody who's trying to control everybody else,
Yeah.
that's a problem.
That's a problem. Or stays up till 3 a.m, balancing the budget down to the last cent.
And they neglect every other aspect of the business.
Yeah. That's a problem.
Those are problems. So, and that's often hard to do.
Yeah.
But in a relationship, people who have some level of OCD, again, it's a balance.
Mm-hmm.
Like most doctors, we have some degree of OCD.
Yeah.
Like if I see a case and I see a presentation of a disease that I don't quite understand, I'll obsess over it. I'll investigate it, and I'll go to the books and research it and find out how to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a healthy channeling of that OCD.
Mm-hmm.
And when we say the D part is disorder,
Mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily a bad thing to have some obsessive compulsiveness. The question is, when it becomes a disorder is when it's pathological.
Yeah.
And just as a way of example, there was a patient in the psychiatry unit that couldn't stop washing her hands.
Mm-hmm.
And the hands were torn apart
Mm.
There was almost no skin left. It was
Oh my
horrible,
gosh.
and she couldn't stop washing her hands.
Mhm.
That's pathological,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So a little bit of narcissism does help with competence, and it may be okay,
Even with confidence.
even with confidence.
Mm.
And we all have some degree.
Mhm.
It's somewhere in the middle is where the virtue is.
Yeah.
But we're talking about when it comes to extremes and it starts affecting relationships,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Whereas my narcissism is so great where material possessions are more important than my family.
Yes.
That would be narcissism.
Here's another one. We're not going to go through this whole thing. Is just give you just an idea. I insist upon getting the respect that is due to me.
Mm.
And if they don't get that respect, they go into the victim position
Yeah.
because that's owed to them.
Yeah.
And then they get aggressive.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
So that's an important clue.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you owe me respect?
No.
Absolutely not.
Mm-mm.
And respect is generally earned.
Mm-hmm.
Although we say in boundary work that respect is the minimum form of love,
Mm-hmm.
and we do owe some level of respect to our fellow man,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And dignity. But at the same time, it's not owed. And what we're talking about here is that you come in and you have to respect me.
Yeah.
And then at that point, I had somebody in an interview tell me, "You will owe me respect." I was the interviewer. I was like, "Okay, we're done with this."
Yeah.
So anyway, so that just gives you an idea of the narcissism
Mm-hmm.
and some of the traits. And when you start seeing that pattern of people that are grandiose and self-importance, then perhaps you need to either step back or just spend a little bit more time with that person before you decide to have a relationship with them. Now, a lot of times, because I do meet a lot of narcissists that they're often very competent, just keep it professional.
Yeah.
And a lot of times those individuals will remain professional, but you just can't get personal with them.
In my years of knowing various narcissists and whatnot, it can be very subtle. What would you say I need to pay attention to if I can't just grasp on one thing? It doesn't seem to be screaming in my face. What do I need to pay attention to?
Well, I think in those situations, it's the value system that comes into the boundaries is where you're going to find it. So in your boundary system, the parts about the values. So we're going to review them. We've covered them in a different episode before. But let's talk about them real quick.
Okay.
So the first one, and this is a spiritual issue, by word or deed indicate that another person is worth less. Okay, so if I continue to devalue others, that's probably a narcissist, and that's a continuous boundary violation.
Yeah.
Now, I may devalue others, but not you when we're dating, because you're special.
Yeah.
And everybody else is an idiot.
Yeah.
Okay.
And keep in mind that the narcissist thinks just the fact that you adore him or her, you're special.
Right.
Yeah.
That's an important issue. Now, when there's an ego threat, in other words, for some reason they feel like they're being devalued, because the narcissist is being devalued, they get aggressive, and that they may start yelling, screaming, throwing insults.
And it may be at the waitress or somebody that they deem below them, or a housekeeper, or somebody, especially if it's in a position where they feel is below them, or even a dog or a pet, something that has less power, a child, you mentioned before.
Yes. And women, I've heard a lot of women often dismiss men's behavior like that, right?
Yeah.
Oh, he doesn't mean it.
Yeah, or I gave him the excuse because my parents were not very nice to him, so now he's acting out against me.
So he's reacting to the parents.
Yeah.
So those situations, usually when people are dating, those clues are there.
Yeah.
But they're often dismissed. Oh, he was drinking too much. Well, he's still responsible for his behavior, even if he drinks a lot.
Yeah.
So if he gets aggressive when he's drinking, that means his inhibitions are down, and he's still responsible for that. If I get drunk and I get in a car and I kill somebody, I'm still responsible. I shouldn't
Yeah.
have taken that drink.
Mhm.
If I know I'm going to behave in a certain way, then I shouldn't be putting myself in a situation that I may act that way, right?
Mhm.
That's a protective boundary. So these individuals are not going to uh, have a good protective boundary and containment, I
Mhm.
should say, not protective, but containment. So they're not going to contain themselves very
Mhm.
well. During the honeymoon phase and during certain situations, they may,
Mhm.
but once they're tired, defenses are down, they'll lash out.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you have to be aware, because the other thing is, if you overvalue somebody, put them up on a pedestal. And what does it mean to overvalue a person? It's essentially you give them godlike, uh,
Qualities.
yes,
Yeah.
or a god role. That doesn't that's you're putting that person in a pedestal. They can
Yeah.
do no wrong. You excuse everything they do.
Mhm.
One last thing is that they blame others for their mistakes.
Yeah.
So if the person cannot own their mistakes, and that's why it's so important when we're in a relationship, we
Mhm.
apologize. That's part of a 12-step program.
Yeah.
We apologize, offer amends.
Mhm.
So when we're wrong, we promptly admit it.
Yeah.
And I forget which number step is that.
Mm.
I'm ashamed.
Yeah.
I'm ashamed that I don't know that number step. But when we make that mistake, we acknowledge our mistakes and we promptly admit it, and then
Yeah.
we offer to make amends.
And that's interesting you say that, because in interviews, that was one of the main questions that my ladies and I would interview and pay attention to. Tell me about one of your biggest mistakes. Oh, I never really made a mistake.
That's a red flag.
Or they sit and, well, one day I was helping out a customer, and it always ended, the mistake usually was something to do with the interviewee would either come up with something that really wasn't a mistake, but it could be interpreted by someone as a mistake, but yet they saw it as something that was really amazing, and they had to back down and admit it was a mistake to make their boss look better. Or they would sit and think for a while and come up with how they caught someone else making a mistake. And so actually they were the hero. They never really could quite admit to a major, or maybe it was just this little flaw, in just a tiny little flaw. They wouldn't admit to, like, some of the most impressive mistakes were interviewing nurses, and some of the most genuine nurses I met told me about when they were a rookie and they made a horrible um, mistake in maybe mis giving the wrong dose of medicine, and they were able to correct it in time or something like that usually, but they admitted to it, and that is often why you will see that doctors and nurses check things 2, 3, 4 times.
Yeah.
They learn that rookie mistake, like, I won't ever do that again. And so I'd say, "So what did you learn from that?" And of course, they'd say, "Now I check things like 3 times."
Right, right. And I remember exactly that. I was an intern. This is
Yeah.
right out of med school, and I was in the intensive care unit.
Mhm.
And I gave penicillin to somebody with a penicillin allergy.
Yeah.
And the minute I realized, I freaked out. I called my upper level resident. I called the attending. I called the nurses.
Yeah.
We gave this person Benadryl. We gave him steroids, and luckily nothing happened. Nothing
Yeah.
bad happened. But that's the thing, is I did not make that mistake again.
Yeah.
Now I made other mistakes, but not that one.
Yeah, but that's exactly what I was looking for,
Right.
was that genuine, I screwed up, I'm human. One I remember, this was a covert narcissist, and these are the hardest ones to find. She was the director over a nursing home, which is scary. And I asked her to tell me about her biggest mistake. Her biggest mistake was that she was caught Basically, it was embezzling. She was caught for what she would do is she would cook the books. That's not her words, but she said that whenever she saved money in one area, she would give it to employees. So basically, she was Robin Hood, rob from the company and give it to the employees, which, sounds like a noble thing. And she was telling me this, thinking she was telling me what a noble thing she was doing. And I'm sitting there going, but I'm the boss here. So would you do that?
You're going to steal from me.
Yeah. And that's your typical covert narcissist where they don't even see their mistake. So yeah, that was a situation where I saw some covert narcissism in that one question in an interview. So tell me more about the Dark Triad.
Okay, so we covered the narcissism in terms of the value system. Now, let's talk about the Macs.
Yeah. Machiavellians.
Yeah, because it's
Machiavellian.
It's Italian, so it's Machiavelli.
Machiavellians.
One of the things about the Macs is that they lie and they can be very, very subtle.
Mm-hmm.
And the Machiavellians, here's one thing, and this is a boundary violation because in here we're getting into manipulation. Remember, control and manipulates others. So the narcissist will control, the Macs will manipulate.
Yeah.
Okay. And what is our other major boundary violation is lying. So they will lie to you. Now, this is why the Machiavellians might be a little bit harder to spot because it may take some time to pick that up. And that's why if you're dating or developing a relationship with someone, you just have to be on the lookout over time.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean you have to be paranoid either, but just be aware of these things. And a lot of times your intuition will pick it up before your rational part of the brain.
And so I used to hate that when people would say, so your intuition, what does that mean?
There's not really a good way to describe it, but in recovery, the intuition is your higher power. That is a part of yourself that is aware of something bigger that your rational brain is not going to pick up. And it'll tell you something's wrong or something's right. So most of the time, I don't want to reduce it to a feeling, but it's like a sense. It's more like, okay, something's wrong.
Like the hair on the back of your neck.
Yes. So something's like, okay, I can't figure out what's wrong here, but something's definitely wrong. And I just gotta be careful. That's your intuition talking.
Or your skin crawling.
Sure.
Stomach kind of clenching.
Yes.
The reason I bring that up is because I used to feel like I was terrible with intuition. Now I feel like I'm really great with intuition. Being ADHD, sometimes I can totally zone out from intuition. But I've had to learn to clue into those, just the feel of unease around.
Right. And that's a good way to put it, the uneasiness. Yeah. I remember you told me one time you thought I was psychic because in one meeting I could spot a person's crookedness, so to speak. And that happened quite a few times.
Yeah.
But a lot of times what happens is that when we grow up with a narcissist or a Machiavellian, they gaslight us.
Yeah.
So then we don't know what's real and what's not. And that's why we lose touch with that intuition. And through proper therapy, sticking to boundaries, that intuition starts coming back, or at least we're able to pay attention to it. Now, clinicians, doctors, we rely on that intuition a lot.
Yeah.
So because the story that the patients give us, while it's the core of what we need to know, a lot of times is biased.
Yeah.
Because it's their perception that affects what we would call facts. And so we have to be able to keep track of what's going on. So compare what the patient's saying, the laboratory findings, the physical exam. And if that all doesn't match, okay, something's wrong here. Something's not right. And that's where we might have to start thinking outside the box to find out what's wrong.
So that's another term I hated when I was getting into recovery was gaslighting. I didn't understand. So what are some phrases a gaslighter will use?
Okay, so the term gaslighting
Mhm.
comes from a movie back in it's a black and white movie, and all I remember is that Angela Lansbury was 19 years old
Oh,
when they filmed that. She was beautiful, but she
yeah.
was she was really young.
Mhm.
And this man was trying to drive his wife mad.
Mhm.
And what he did is he would turn on these gas lights in the house.
Mhm.
This was an old Victorian home, if I remember correctly.
Before electricity.
Yes.
Mhm.
So they would turn the gas lights on and turn them off. And then she would say, "Why are these lights coming on?" And he would say, "There's no lights.
Mm.
There's no lights." And then the maid would agree because that was the husband's lover.
Uh-huh.
There are no lights. There are no lights here. So that's where the gaslighting
Spooky.
comes from.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's a way of lying.
So that's often what cheaters will do. "Oh, no,
Mhm.
you didn't see me cheating. That's my secretary," or "We're just friends," or
Or, for example, they've been out drinking.
Mhm.
They come from work and they smell like alcohol.
Yeah.
And well, I just had some drinks for the business drinks when they
Yeah.
might have been out doing something
Or you're
else.
paranoid. You're the problem.
You're the
You're
problem. Not
paranoid.
that you're drinking, you're going out and drinking with your friends, is that you're paranoid that I'm
Or
doing
you're
something
such a
wrong.
teetotaler.
Yes.
Yeah.
So those things are the problem, like men going to a strip club, married men.
Yeah. Yeah.
Men shouldn't be in a strip club, period, but besides the point.
Yeah.
But married men going to a strip club, that's not okay.
Yeah. Well, it's just a bachelor's party.
That's gaslighting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Or you're so insecure.
You're insecure.
Mhm.
So it's your problem, not
Yeah,
mine.
yeah.
So that's perfect gaslighting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
The other thing is the best way to handle people is to tell them what they want to hear.
Mhm.
So that's a major manipulation, right?
Yeah.
By the way, I'm pulling these questions out of the personality inventories. People can look these up online.
Mhm.
Just put narcissistic personality inventory. I'm using the 16 because there's 16 questions and it's easy.
Mhm.
We're not trying to diagnose people here. We're just trying to recognize patterns.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We don't need to be psychologists to tell when somebody's pulling these numbers on
Yeah.
us. They tell you that it is hard to get ahead without cutting corners here and there.
Mhm. Yeah.
So often they'll plagiarize or
Yeah.
they take credit for somebody else's work.
Yeah.
So if they're doing that,
Play with their taxes a little.
yes, the biggest difference between criminals and other people is criminals are stupid enough to get caught.
Oh, I've heard that one before. That's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You need to be out that door
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah.
So manipulation, lying, those are the big things that we're going to see with the Max,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And then the other one is the psychopath. So here are the features of the psychopath. Is callousness.
Mhm.
So that's a lack of empathy for others.
Mhm.
And they're impulsive and reckless. The bad boy,
Yeah.
that
The rebel.
the rebel
Mhm.
drives a motorcycle.
Mhm.
Even after he has kids, he's driving around a motorcycle.
Yeah.
Often tattoos. I know tattoos are very popular these days.
Not the pretty tattoos, the trendy, but you know,
Like the scary ones.
the spider web, the devil,
And in the face.
yeah, on the face and the neck.
Here is a clear one.
Yeah.
What does Charles Manson have in his forehead?
The swastika.
Okay, so don't
if
forget that
the
one.
sweetest guy in the world walks up to you with a swastika
In his
between,
forehead.
unless he was held down in some prison camp, and you'd have to ask why was he in a prison camp? You need to ask some questions. Some people do have some interesting stories.
Right.
It might be because I have an angel on this side and a devil on this side, and it helps me remember which one do I want to feed. That might be a very deep answer. But the person that's like, because I like to be tough or whatever, be careful. You need to take those archetypes seriously.
So when you're talking about archetypes, because I don't know that everybody understands what that means, you're talking about a subconscious process that is being expressed.
Yes.
And it can be a very dark
Yeah.
part of themselves. And it's not always
Bad.
a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to the tattoos, like in the armed forces, they often put on tattoos. Like United States Marine Corps, they'll have those are fine. Those are not the ones we're talking about.
Yeah, we're
It's
talking
like
about,
you go to a goth nightclub.
if you've got a pentagram and a goat in the middle on your chest,
Or somebody engaging in a X-rated act.
Yeah.
Because we've seen those.
Yeah.
Those are probably not a good sign.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So the impulsivity and the callousness, lack of empathy.
Yeah.
So there might be cruelty to animals. That's something that goes into antisocial behavior as well.
Yeah.
But the impulsivity is part of that, what drives that short-term mating strategy that we talked about. So if they're having sex very quickly,
Yeah.
or they're forcing you to do sexual activities that you're uncomfortable with, which is, that is a boundary violation,
Mhm.
then that's where you have some more clues as to that. So going down the list again, breaking commitments for no reason, that's your Mac.
Yeah.
But that can also be your narcissist, right? We talked about lying, ridiculing another person. So now I do think there's a role for political satire, although it's, that's fine. But if you're really ridiculing other people constantly, then you're probably dealing with a narcissist.
Yeah.
The Machiavellians might be a little bit more subtle.
I would also like to say the Machiavellians are going to be more successful. So you often hear that the psychopaths are impulsive, and they're often the ones that end up in prison. They can't control themselves.
Get into a lot of fights, bar fights, that kind of stuff.
Fights and abusive behavior. The narcissist is
it's more controlling.
Yeah, is more controlling. A true full-blown narcissist is not going to be very successful. They're going to have that inner child that's really frightened of being incompetent and inadequate, but on the outside,
of not being accepted. Right?
Yeah, on the outside projects this big overpuffed, over-exaggerated character.
So we're running short on time. And what about women? Narcissism in women, because it takes a little bit different form.
Yeah.
Women do tend to be a little bit more on the vulnerable side, but the aggressive part is different.
Yes.
And that is more manipulation, gossip.
Yeah.
And reputation. They attack people's reputation because when men are, one of the reasons that men's discussions tend to be a little bit more respectful is there's an implied threat of physical aggression, right?
Yeah.
So men tend to just, when they're talking to each other, tend to be a little bit more respectful. Women tend to just undermine things and then come around. And the solution for that, for the everyday situation, is to have healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
Because these boundaries will tell you that person has got a problem. You may not know exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But it'll tell you there's something wrong here. You have to be careful.
Yeah.
And that's your intuition telling you that, right?
Yeah.
So lying, manipulation, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time. Gaslighting is manipulation.
Gossiping.
So the drinking is something we hear a lot from couples, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
drinking, promiscuity.
Yeah. So those things, I do think that couples can come back from those things.
Yeah.
But the narcissist needs to be able to apologize.
Yeah.
And the other narcissist needs to stop trying to control or manipulate them.
Yeah.
Right? Because let's say the man is drinking and the woman's trying to get him to stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or makes excuses. It's an enabler. Brings him, just complaining about the alcohol, but then goes to the grocery store and brings a six-pack.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, good. Come on, dude.
Yeah.
So those are the things where you have healthy boundaries, you recognize that and you behave accordingly. And as we talked about in other podcasts, is that when you're emulating healthy behavior, the other person takes notice.
Yeah.
And usually, because they don't want to feel abandoned, if this is a healthy person or, basically a healthy person, they will start noticing and they want the relationship to move forward. So they'll start working on themselves.
Yeah.
So
what are some healthy boundaries you can set with a psychopath, a narcissist, or a Machiavellian?
Unfortunately, a lot of times what happens is these people are not going to change unless they're in enough pain. So all you can do is focus on yourself. So don't tolerate the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So any of these boundary violations, just don't tolerate them.
Yeah.
Don't make excuses. Don't fall for the gaslighting.
Mm-hmm. Rather than, because often what people do is they try to defend themselves. Well, no, I think you are drinking too much. No, I'm not. I only
Right.
had a 6-pack.
Well, and then you don't want to get into an argument about whether they say, okay, you say you're not drinking. I think you're drinking. Let's leave it at that. But then you don't fall for it.
Yeah.
And you do keep focusing on yourself, and the benefits or the answers will become obvious to you as you work on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, the place where you really need to step in and be very careful is if there's abuse.
Yeah.
Right? Do not tolerate physical abuse, abusing of the children.
Mm.
If one of the spouses is having affairs, you don't tolerate that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we talked about no fault divorce.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't agree, we don't encourage divorce, but promiscuity, physical abuse, sexual abuse, those things cannot be tolerated. That would be about the only reason that we wouldn't support a divorce, or at least the threat of divorce,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
If the children are being sexually abused,
Get out of there.
Yeah, that's it. You got to take the children out of that environment. And the authorities do need to be involved.
Yeah. And there are organizations in your
that
area.
can help you. Yeah, they are. So we do want to mention some organizations focus on the family.
Mm-hmm.
Does provide help for couples.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is Them Before Us. We have no financial relation to these organizations, but we'd like to put the links on there for Them Before Us. They're working with government and other legislators to pass laws that help protect children.
Mm-hmm.
And the focus on the family group does have support systems for families to stay. We want the families to stay together.
Yeah.
And then part of the reason we started this discussion is women need to...
and men.
Yeah, well, I was going to say women first need to stop engaging in the hookup culture.
Yeah.
And men need to be more respectful of women.
Yes.
This whole red pill, at least as I understand it, movement that is reactionary to feminism
reaction
is not the right reaction.
No.
I mean, chivalry is still a thing.
Yeah.
And being a gentleman is what women should be looking for. Men should be trying to be gentlemen,
mm-hmm.
and women should be trying to be ladies. And that may sound very old-fashioned, but...
And what we tell our boys is, if you're being a gentleman on a date and you're being rejected over it, great. That's an automatic. It. Okay, that she just made your life easier and told you right away who she was, and believe her. Don't try to chase her. Okay, fine, I'll go.
And that's something
else.
that we see with this younger generation is they're sending naked pictures to each other.
Yeah.
That's not okay. That's a boundary violation.
Yeah,
that's
huge.
not okay. That's telling you, I'm sick.
Well, and it happens to I know older women who've dated, and they get those texts too. So, yeah. But their way
You mean older women who are dating?
Women that I've known who were dating, and they got those disgusting pictures, and it was just an easy, okay, that's not the person for me. That's just don't look at it as oh, how horrible. Look at it or even I need to change this person. Look at it as a sign that, oh, great, this person's letting me know right away he's not for me or she's not for me when they send you that. Thank you for joining us today at Boundaries and Beyond. We would love for you to like and share with all those boundaryless friends and family members out there, as well as subscribe to our podcast. Also, please join us on Instagram at Boundaries Beyond Podcast. See you then.
See you then.